If we are dependent upon anything, then we don't have virtue. Virtue and vice cannot coexist. Virtue is nothing other than developing the freedom to say no to ourselves so that we can say yes to the good of the other. That we can say yes to the good of the relationship. But we don't. If you have a phone in your pocket, a smartphone that you use regularly, you are probably, this is just a guess on my part, over 50%, maybe 70, 80% likely to be a dopamine. And so we're already behind the power curve. We're already lacking the kind of resources that we need to free ourselves from ourselves. And if we don't know any of this, we are going to be just living in society in such a way that we are not going to be able to have a joyful relationship. This isn't universal, and a lot of things, all other things come together in terms of what makes a particular couple's relationship difficult or relatively harmonious. I mean, we're all subjected to these difficulties in this kind of society. But there is a likelihood, higher likelihood than not, that we're going to have trouble. The statistics bear that out. The statistics, over half of marriages, these are statistics, especially with regard to marriage, are very difficult to pin down, but most agree that over half of marriages won't last more than 7 years. And so statistically, we are already in trouble. And again, there are some statistics that suggest that maybe this might be different for practicing Catholics or not. But anecdotally, it doesn't seem like there is any real help with being Catholic. Just knowing what we should be doing isn't enough. There's more that we need to do. So what can we do? Well, first of all, we have to recognize the way that our relationships, especially our opposite sex relationships, our relationships that we would call romantic relationships, affect us. And the way that we're inclined to behave. Because everybody who's created is created after the image and likeness of God. Everybody is a precious soul who can not be replaced. So precious that the Father sent His Son into the world who suffered and died for each and every one of us. But we don't look at one another that way. But when we find somebody who seems to recognize that in us, that we recognize that in the other, and they think that maybe, right, we would like to be in this unique relationship with you, well, that is intoxicating. And all of a sudden, the other is the most perfect person in the world. And that we can, especially today, in the way that we behave, we do not develop relationships in a healthy way. Too much of our interactions are virtual, are not incarnational. And that has a negative effect in the way that we behave in our relationships. We have to realize that we need to be on, if we're not going to, even without intending to, use the other for what we get out of it, we are going to have to be on our guard. Because just nature, fallen nature left to itself, we are going to idealize the other, we are going to overshare, and develop this sense of intimacy, the sense of knowing the other that we don't even really know. And we're going to fall head over heels with somebody who doesn't exist, somebody that we have created. And we're not going to be able to really know who that person is until things start showing us. And I suppose relationships develop a little bit more slowly in some ways in terms of commitments. But to be in an exclusive relationship, therefore, there can only be one purpose, one authentic purpose, and that's to discern marriage. So exclusive dating shouldn't happen when discerning marriage is not a possibility. Because there's only one other option, to be using the other for what you get out of it. So an exclusive relationship should be something, we should get to know each other. We should be able to have relationships with one another and come to understand one another. And before you start getting into an exclusive relationship, You really should be spending time with another, not necessarily picking out, well, I like this, and this is good for me, and this is good for me. Just those habits of, is this good for me, starts turning the relationship, the other person, about me. We want to know the other person on their own terms, who they are for their own sake. And so we have to check ourselves. No, I don't accept that this person is for me. God created this person for themselves, and I want to come to know who this person is on their own terms. And so keeping ourselves emotionally, if you will, continent. Sometimes men fall much more quickly than women for one major reason, is we have no clue what it is we're feeling. Well, that feels good. Yes, I like that. And just when you say yes to your emotions, especially those powerful emotions, you're locked in, and it becomes very difficult. So, developing a relationship in a progressive way, coming to know the person first on their own terms. If we decide then that this person might be somebody that we would like to investigate in terms of potential for marriage, we have to make sure that we already know that they're the same, they think very much like we do. Sorry. So the next step, I would say, is when we move to exclusive dating, I would call that intentional dating or purposeful dating. At that point in time, we have to recognize, okay, we are taking ourselves out of the pool, if you will, and we are going to investigate whether or not God might be calling each of us. But during this time, we have to be very much guarding ourselves, guarding our feelings, saying no to feelings we shouldn't be saying yes to yet, because we're starting to learn more and more about the person. But here, in this exclusive dating, in the initial steps, we cannot overshare. If we share too much about ourselves, which is very much a habit of doing, then we're going to develop a false sense of knowing, a false sense of intimacy. We can only really say yes to what we think we know about the others based upon what we see. Because we know we will be inclined to, just because we've developed this relationship, we know the person is potentially of interest, then we're going to be inclined to want to see in the other what we want, rather than what is really there. So we have to be chaste, continent, physically, very chaste emotionally, and very much aware of what it is that we're thinking about the person, and trying to know the person as a person, not as somebody for us. And prayer starts, but I would say let's not necessarily pray a lot together yet. The next stage I would say is courtship. And what would move us from intentional dating to courtship is that we have seen enough of one another that we know that we can trust the other. Because we now going to have to share more and more about ourselves. Because by the end of courtship, before a decision is made, the other has to know everything about us. But we don't want to have everything that we're sharing. We shouldn't have everything we're sharing blasted on Facebook. We have to trust that regardless of where this relationship goes, the other person is going to keep private what needs to be kept private. And if we haven't seen enough of the other person to make that judgment, we're not yet ready for courtship. So the period of courtship is now, and I recommend a facilitated period of courtship, where we can go through systematically, understanding more about ourselves and one another. And that, by the way, is where the Great Mystery, the program that Mother of the Americas Institute has developed, is meant to pick up. Going through, it's a period of discernment, of discovery about ourselves and our relationship with one another. And once you go through this period of courtship sufficiently, then there should be a kind of a break and a more intense period of prayer and discernment. And then a decision can be made about whether to proceed on to engagement or betrothal.